Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for a really fascinating examination of decision making, but under the most extreme stress imaginable. We're deliberately looking beyond, the stable, predictable boardrooms of the West. We're turning our attention to a place where economic shock isn't the exception, it's the rule. We're going to be analyzing the playbook forged by Nepal's top CEOs to really understand what true resilience looks like.
And that context you mentioned, it's absolutely everything because for these executives, the ambient condition is just fundamentally different. It's not a stable system that gets interrupted by a crisis every now and then. Our sources, they really emphasize this. They describe it as a continuous crisis punctuated by brief, deceptive moments of calm.
Hmm.
And when you think about the shocks they have to navigate, I mean, everything from devastating earthquakes to intense political volatility, crippling trade blockades, sudden liquidity crises, it becomes so clear that the business environment is just permanently hostile.
Okay, so let's unpack that because that sounds like a brutal filter. It's not just rewarding careful management, it must be actively weeding out any leadership that thinks primarily in terms of, say, optimization or efficiency.
Exactly.
It rewards a very specific, hardened kind of strategic leadership. And our mission here is to examine three, well, pretty counterintuitive strategies that allow these resilient firms to not just survive, but to systematically outperform their peers, actually turn that volatility into an advantage.
That's the key. What's so fascinating is the overarching philosophy at play. These leaders, they've basically rejected the standard business school goal of optimizing for a steady state. They've really internalized the work of people like Nassim Taleb. They're architected businesses that just assume instability is the baseline. The focus is on building anti-fragility, the ability to literally get stronger from shocks right into the company's DNA. So these strategies, they fundamentally defy that conventional wisdom of being lean and mean.
Okay, so if the goal is anti-fragility, let's dive into the first strategy. It seems to fly in the face of all financial orthodoxy. We're calling this the tyranny of the immediate, cash as a strategic weapon. Whoop. This flips the entire script. I mean, standard Western business wisdom, it views a big cash reserve as lazy capital.
Right, uninvested.
Exactly. Money that just drags down your return on equity. The pressure from shareholders is always to minimize cash and maximize leverage.
And that's precisely the pressure these CEOs actively fight. The Nepali approach is the complete opposite. Cash is the primary strategic asset, not some residual item you try to get rid of. And the analysis shows this requires, well, immense discipline because you're consciously accepting lower profitability during the stable periods. We're talking about leaders who will hold 15, maybe 20% of their balance sheet in low-yielding cash. They're paying an opportunity cost year after year.
That sounds like a really tough conversation to have with your board. I mean, how do they manage those shareholder expectations when they're deliberately taking a lower ROE during the quote-unquote good times?
That is the core conflict, isn't it? They manage it by framing it differently. It's not an opportunity cost. It's the non-negotiable premium for an insurance policy against total system failure. They've learned the hard way that the risk of a credit market collapse is so high that liquidity trumps everything. It trumps those marginal gains in quarterly returns.
And the market eventually learns to reward that.
It does. It learns to prioritize survival and longevity over those short-term spikes.
And we have a perfect, almost visceral illustration of why this works, the 2022 to 2023 liquidity crisis. For anyone listening who's unfamiliar with the mechanics here, inflation was soaring, imports were draining foreign currency reserves, and the central bank, the NRB, just slammed the brakes on monetary policy. Can you describe what happened next? Because the effect was immediate.
Oh, it was crippling. The credit market just seized up, almost instantly. Banks stopped all new lending. They even struggled to honor existing credit lines. So for any business that depends on rolling over short-term loans, which is, let's be honest, most businesses globally, they were suddenly solvent on paper, but completely illiquid.
So they couldn't operate.
They couldn't operate. They were facing shutdown, not because demand disappeared, but because the actual cash needed to pay salaries, buy materials, it just evaporated. Overnight.
And while all their competitors were scrambling, facing this crisis, the cash hoarding strategists were, what? Just sitting pretty?
They weren't just sitting pretty, they were thriving. They weren't part of that scramble for credit that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Let's take that construction CEO from the source material, his rivals. They're defaulting on payments, they can't get materials, they can't pay their staff. He, on the other hand, deploys his cash reserves. He starts paying suppliers up front, in full.
Which, in that environment, must have been a godsend for the suppliers.
A huge advantage. He secured preferential pricing, First, access to scarce materials, and crucially, loyalty. While rivals were laying off staff and halting projects, his company kept its entire payroll, kept projects running, and actually accelerated construction. They gained months on the competition just with cash.
So it's not just about survival. This strategic liquidity, it gives the company what the analysis calls a predatory capability.
Ah.
During the recovery booms, whether it's after an earthquake or after a lockdown, these are the only ones left standing with cash.
Exactly. And they use it. They acquire distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. They poach the best talent from rivals who are shedding staff. They lock in long-term contracts at favorable rates.
They turn the chaos into an acquisition opportunity.
That's it. They paid the premium during the good times, and now they get to dictate the terms during the bad. It's a mechanism that literally transforms systemic instability into corporate growth.
That insight is a perfect transition to our second core strategy, designed for disruption. This is about the deliberate embrace of what looks like inefficiency and redundancy.
Right, and this is a direct challenge to the global just-in-time, or JIT, supply chain model that, dominates modern manufacturing. For a landlocked country like Nepal, JIT is seen as a theoretical fantasy with catastrophic real-world failure points. It's a model that's optimized for a perfect world, a world with reliable ports, stable politics.
A world that doesn't exist there.
It just doesn't exist there. To pursue JIT is to intentionally build a single point of failure into your business.
And the ultimate stress test for this was the 2015-2016 unofficial trade blockade at the India-Nepal border, specifically at the Bergen-Draxal crossing, which is the choke point for most of the country's trade. The firms built on those lean JIT principles, they must have just collapsed.
Within days,
Yeah.
their assembly lines just halted. That single point of failure failed completely.
So what did the resilient leaders do?
They employed a just-in-case strategy. It's expensive, but it's life-saving. It has two main parts. First, rigorous supplier diversification. They maintain active relationships with suppliers in both India and China, even if, say, the Indian supplier is consistently 20% cheaper.
So they're knowingly paying more in normal times.
Knowingly paying more. So when that southern border closed, they immediately activated the more expensive, much more difficult northern corridors through China. It was costly, but they were still operating while their rivals were completely dark.
And the second part of this just-in-case strategy is inventory. This is where they really defy modern management.
Oh, absolutely. They hold significant buffer stocks. We're talking 3 to 6 months of inventory for critical materials. The global norm is maybe 2 to 4 weeks.
The carrying costs for that must be astronomical. Warehousing, insurance.
They're substantial. Any Western analyst would look at that and call it strategic fat. But during the blockade, that fat became their single most valuable asset. They were the only ones still producing, still selling often at inflated prices because of the scarcity. They captured huge market share that their rivals just never got back.
So that's the calculation. The cost of the inefficiency pays for itself by guaranteeing you're the only one in the market when a crisis hits.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just inventory. We see them owning their own small fleet of trucks, even if outsourcing is cheaper, just to move goods during a strike. Or investing in their own power generation to deal with electricity shortages.
So for them, efficiency isn't minimizing cost in a perfect system.
No, it's maximizing operational uptime in a very imperfect reality. What looks like fat is actually their strategic muscle.
This all builds a picture of anti-fragility. They survive the cash crunch, they survive the supply shock. But how do they deal with sudden shifts in demand or policy? That brings us to the final tenet, the diversification paradox. This challenges that whole Silicon Valley mantra of singular focus.
It's all about risk management at the portfolio level. Look, in a stable market, specialization makes you efficient. In Nepal, over-specialization makes you fragile. It creates a vulnerability that just being good at your job can't fix. So the most durable business houses there, they operate as these sprawling, almost disjointed conglomerates.
Right, you see them with interests in hydropower and consumer goods, banking, hospitality, all under one roof.
Yeah.
From the outside, it looks illogical. There's no synergy.
There's no synergy, but when a crisis hits one sector, the others hold the whole thing up. And the COVID pandemic was the perfect test case for this.
Of course. Hospitality and tourism. Revenue just dropped to zero overnight.
Instantly to zero. And this is where the diversification worked as a pure survival mechanism. The massive losses from their hotels and travel agencies were subsidized by the steady cash flow from other divisions.
Because people still needed to buy soap and noodles.
Exactly. The FMCG divisions were stable. Hydropower, as essential infrastructure, provided guaranteed revenue. And their IT services arm might have even boomed with the shift to remote work.
So the goal isn't synergy, it's diversification for survival. They're blending sectors with what the sources call uncorrelated risks.
Yes, they'll pair something capital-intensive like energy with a high-turnover consumer business, or an internationally exposed sector like tourism with a purely domestic, non-discretionary one.
So that's the paradox. By diluting the group's focus, the CEO actually concentrates the enterprise's overall resilience.
It ensures that no single shock, be it financial, political, or natural, can sink the entire ship.
Let's pull this all together. The cash hoarding, the expensive redundancy, the portfolio diversification, it really is a unified theory of business forged in instability.
It is. It's a conscious rejection of the optimization mindset. The goal for these leaders isn't trying to predict the next crisis. That's impossible. The goal is to build a corporate vessel that is structurally unthinkable, ready for any crisis.
And looking forward, our sources suggest that continued volatility will only widen the gap between these anti-fragile firms and the traditional lean firms that are gambling on stability.
And you have to factor in regulatory shocks, too. Sudden tax changes, new import rules, these are becoming more common everywhere. This model is the best defense. High cash absorbs the transition costs, and diversification insulates you if one sector gets targeted by policymakers.
Which brings us to the hard truth for any business in a volatile market, really anywhere in the world: the pursuit of pure, lean efficiency that's taught in every business school. It's a strategic liability in this kind of context.
It is. Anyone importing those stability-centric models without radically adapting them is essentially gambling with their survival. The key takeaway here is understanding the true cost of doing business in these environments. It isn't just labor or capital. It's the ongoing non-negotiable price of building and maintaining a strategic buffer against the inevitable next crisis.
They pay the premium for survival, knowing that eventually everyone else will pay the price of collapse.
So that leaves a provocative thought for you, the listener, to consider. If the real goal in volatile markets is anti-fragility, not just surviving shocks, but actually gaining strength from them, then what new metrics should we be tracking? Should we move beyond just optimizing for return on equity and maybe start calculating a company's anti-fragility ratio, something that measures its capacity for this kind of strategic buffering and redundancy?
That is a powerful challenge. It forces us all to think about the difference between optimizing a business for a perfect theoretical system versus building real resilience for the chaotic world we actually live in. Thank you for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.